Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1997 epic Titanic. Now, before I get around to sharing my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Sean for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. And I also have a couple other options as well if PayPal doesn't work for you that will also be featured in the video description. Just feel free to take one of those options and I will get to the request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Titanic is one of those films that I did see when it came out in the theater. I saw it with my one of my grandparents, and it was one of those movies that going in, I thought it wasn't going to be for me. I thought it was going to be a chick flick. I was not a big fan of chick flicks then. I still am not. It's just a matter of personal preference. And in some ways it was, in other ways it wasn't, and it surprised me when I saw it in the theater. Like, I actually didn't mind the movie. And I remember watching the film on VHS quite a bit. The two tape set. But like a lot of other people, I remember watching the second tape more than the first tape because that's the part where the ship hits the iceberg and the ship starts to sink, and that's just more exciting and enjoyable and fun to watch for me than the first half of the film. And honestly, I still feel that way about the movie after rewatching it after all this time. It's a tale of two halves for me. It's a film where the first half is kind of there, but then the second half, once things really start to get crazy, when the ship hits the iceberg and the shit hits the fan, then the film is a genuine spectacle and something that I honestly felt was quite thrilling and exhilarating to watch. And that's where the film has the most resonance to me. The stuff leading up to that is just kind of the equivalent of honestly padding for me, other than maybe a handful of scenes. And that's a big part of why I just like this film. I don't love Titanic. There are people who love this movie. This is their favorite James Cameron movie. This is one of their favorite films ever. I'm not in that boat with this movie, but I do like the film. I do appreciate it. I absolutely admire the craftsmanship and the detail and just the brilliance that's on on screen when it comes to the art direction and the production design and the costuming and the visual effects and things like that. I mean, this film is an unbelievable showcase of visual and practical effects that to this day are still jaw dropping and still hold up remarkably well. And it's another film where you get to see a master of his craft at work. The direction in Titanic is tremendous. James Cameron, he really is on top of the world here. He's the king of the world. I have nothing to say about his direction other than a bunch of superlatives. Like, it's great, it's stupendous, it's spectacular. This is a director who's at their peak, just really getting everything that he possibly can out of every shot with every chosen camera angle and perspective and filmmaking technique. He employs everything effortlessly with just the utmost efficiency, and he works so well with the lighting and with just really bringing the most out of every aspect of the production. When it comes to the visual effects, really makes those sequences pop. When it comes to the scenes that are just trying to really showcase the uh, just awesome and just finely crafted costume design, he's great at making those elements of the film just wow you. When it comes to the production design, the art direction, he's amazing at that. When it comes to making those scenes really pop off the screen, and he's good at working with this cast and getting a lot of good, capable performances out of them. There are some performances that are a little hit and miss for me, but I don't necessarily blame Cameron for that. I think that's more of a individual actor thing, specifically when it comes to some of the actors who didn't have as much experience leading up to shooting this film. But it's just one of those movies where it really is a spectacle and it is a sight to behold. And in large part, it's because of what Cameron does behind the camera. Now, the screenplay, on the other hand, by James Cameron, to me, it really is a mixed bag. It's hit and miss. There are times where it's just smooth sailing. Then there's other times where it's hitting that iceberg and it's starting to slowly sink to the bottom of the ocean. And the reason for that is because this was unlike anything that Cameron had ever tackled or attempted as a writer. And what you have is a screenplay that is very much affected by this, by a writer who prior to this did a lot of action films, sci-fi movies, thrillers, and he never wrote a straight up romance, never did that. He never did a historical drama. He never wrote anything like that before. So what you have is a talented writer working and writing in a part of it of the creative ocean, so to speak, that he's not that familiar with. So in a lot of ways, he's out there without a life raft, and there are times where he straight up drowns. And I think a lot of the reasons why a lot of people nowadays have this pushback against this film is because of Cameron's writing. Is because there are moments in the film where the romance between Jack and Rose, for instance, is just so cornball. It's so corny. It's so overly schmaltzy. And on top of that, there are other parts of the film that just come across as fake and not very genuine and forced. Really heavy-handed, hammy, forced attempts at drama with um, Rose and her mother, or Rose and her fiance, or sequences where the script is trying to inject some extra bit of drama into the scene, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense and comes across as just a bunch of Hollywood bullshit. Like the stuff with Cal, for instance, taking the gun and shooting at Rose and Jack in the film's finale while the ship is sinking. Like that scene is just ridiculous. And there's other stuff too where it's just so painfully obvious that it's trying to make a sequence into something that doesn't come across or doesn't really flow naturally. And that's because Cameron just, this isn't his wheelhouse. This is not his forte as a writer. And dialogue isn't necessarily his forte either. A lot of his forte involves sequences of events, it involves action, it involves intrigue, it involves thrills. It doesn't involve sequences that are, let's just say, trying to be deep or trying to evoke um, a lot of a specific emotion, unless it's something that is relatively easy to grasp, like, you know, extreme levels of grief, for instance. Uh, he really does a great job writing those kind of scenes when things are at their extremes. When it comes to stuff that's supposed to be a little bit subdued or a little more subtle, he has no idea what he's doing, and he's out in the deep end, and he's struggling to find air, and it's very evident with this script. And what I mean by him struggling for air is something that's even evident in like the first 10 minutes of this script. The sequences that start the film, underwater, showcasing the Titanic and all of its rusted glory for real. Like these are real shots of the Titanic underwater, the ruins of what was once a glorious, magnificent ship, and there's no context for any of these scenes. You're not provided with a reason as to why you're here, other than just a superficial one to show off some underwater photography. It's not until later that you find out that the reason why this is important and the reason why you're seeing these scenes is because this crew that is led by Bill Paxton's character is trying to find the heart of the ocean. That's not clarified and that's not made clear within the first 10 minutes of the movie, and it's a problem, at least to me personally. It's like, okay, that's kind of cool, or seeing the underwater photography and we're seeing the Titanic, but why? It's a very simple thing, and Cameron just glosses over that. I guess he feels that it was interesting and intriguing enough without extra context, but for me, that's not the case at all. And then when you do get the context, even the way that that's written just feels kind of tacky. And then you lead to the whole flashback stuff, which is the majority of the movie, involving Rose and her budding relationship with Jack, and how the two meet and how they fall in love, and how that ties into the sinking of the Titanic and how she ultimately survives. And there are moments with the narration in particular that are just so cheeseball in terms of the way they're written. And then you have the dynamic between Jack and Rose, which a lot of people love, and I think a lot of that really has to do with DiCaprio and Winslet and the chemistry that the two have together. Not necessarily the dialogue that they're given, not necessarily a lot of the scenes that they have with one another in terms of their back and forth, or the reason why they ultimately fall for one another and how this plays out, other than maybe like a few sequences here and there. But there's a lot of stuff that just feels very forced, very heavy-handed, very hammy. Uh, and like the whole class dynamic stuff, and a lot of things involving Rose just trying to show Jack that she can be as uncouth, or she can be as uh rough and not necessarily raw, but she can be as much of a uncouth type of person as Jack is. And a lot of that just felt like it was just shoehorned in there just to make Rose into a character that is more dynamic, but it just comes across as very artificial to me. And a good chunk of this first half, in fact, the majority of the first hour and a half or 2 hours, is this whole budding romance between these two characters. And if you are just kind of on the fence with it, or you're just kind of indifferent on it, or you're not a fan of it at all, it can be a hard film to get into, because a lot of it's about this. And to me, that's just not really that interesting, and I'm not really that compelled by it because of the way that it's written. It's written by a guy who's writing his first romance novel. That's really what it is. It's like James Cameron's first romance novel, and there's a lot of moments where he's hitting those first time uh um bumps in the road that happens with first timers, and it's almost like you're seeing a rough draft at times. Like there are lines of dialogue and moments that are supposed to be romantic and supposed to be sweet or charming, and they just come across as cringe. Like the whole scene with Rose and Jack on the bow of the ship, and he's having her close her eyes, and then he pulls his hands away and has her open her eyes, and she looks down at the ocean while she's on the bow of the ship, and she goes, "I'm flying!" Like, that was ridiculous. I laughed. I don't think that's the reaction that Cameron was necessarily trying to get. And there are a lot of moments like that, draw me like one of your French girls, where it's just a lot of this stuff, it just comes across as laughable. Not necessarily an example of really strong uh, elements of a loving romance. It just comes across like it's laughable. Like, it's it's a 10th grader's idea of what a romance is between a man and a woman, and it's kind of silly, and it's it's cringe to me. It really is. Like, even the stuff at the end with Jack and Rose, and they're on the boat. They're not necessarily on the boat, but they were on the boat earlier. But like the scene that a lot of people talk about, people are mad at Rose because Jack could have been on the a piece of wood too, or the door, or whatever it was. But yeah, that whole like don't let go, and then she lets go, and then he falls. Like, it's just so just trite and overwrought and just painful to me. Like, it really is. It is. It's kind of like baby's first romance, written by James Cameron. It's like, I know Cameron is more capable when it comes to writing, but this is just not his forte. This is not what he's good at. And it takes away from his strengths as a writer to me, because so much of the film is focused on this romance between Jack and Rose that is just full of cliches and just been there, done that, simple stuff, and trying to pull at your heartstrings and doing it so hard that it breaks the strings. And it takes away from characters like Molly Brown, or uh, Cal, or the guy who built the Titanic, and some of these other more interesting characters that to me have more of a reason to be more of a focus because they actually exist in reality. And I know Cameron can do a good job writing characters. The Abyss is a masterclass when it comes to a film that has a cast of characters that is wide and varied, with different personalities and different parts of the plot and different aspects of the story that they are asked to implement or to help move along. And he's really good at doing that stuff. So it just felt like it was a disappointment to see those other characters just be put on the back burner for these very simple, just generic characters in Jack and Rose. And also, it takes away from some of the drama to me, because I'm just not as compelled by the love story. I'm more interested in the reality of the Titanic sinking. I'm more interested in the guy who built the ship. I'm more interested in the corners that were cut. I'm more interested in other things, other sequences, other characters who aren't necessarily on the screen as much, that just are more compelling to me. Like the group of violinists, which I don't think they all play the violin, but you know what I'm getting at. The guys who play the music, and they play their instruments as the ship is sinking, which is actually a real thing. It's based on a real story. Or the older couple that are embracing each other as the water comes in and washes them away to their death. The moment with the mother telling the story to her kids, one last bedtime story before they go to sleep forever. The sequences involving the mass panic and the chaos when the realization sets in that the ship is sinking and we need to get everybody in the lifeboats. And you have the scene that's absolutely heart wrenching, where there's this daughter who, this little girl who's, just reaching her hands out for her daddy, and her daddy it tells her that, you know, you have to go. Like, this is, for the mommies and the daughters, and there'll be one for the daddies, but there is no one for the daddies. There is no ship for the daddies. The daddy doesn't make it. She never sees her father again. Like, that is compelling. Jack and Rose, the Walmart bargain bin discount version of Romeo and Juliet, doesn't do as much for me. But that's just me personally. That's one of the biggest problems I have with this script, is that I don't really care as much about Jack and Rose and their romance. I'm just very indifferent and just kind of there with it. It's one of those things I can take or leave most of the time. The one thing that makes it interesting is the back and forth between Rose and her fiance Cal, and just that whole bit of writing. But even that has its issues because of the way that Cal is written. He's written in such a cartoonish way. Like, there's no depth to him. There's only one side you ever see of this guy, and it's him just being a jealous prick. Like, would have been nice to have seen some other side of him, which would make it understandable as to why Rose is conflicted initially when it comes to breaking up with him, and so on. You never really see that because the way that it's written is just so one note. And that's just a problem with the script in general. Just so many things are one note. But it's effective when it gets to the point where the ship starts to sink. Because then Cameron is in his comfort zone, and now he's just throwing out disaster sequences and big heavy effects scenes and stunts, and that's where Jack and Rose work for me the best, is when they're in peril. When the two are in peril and they're trying to survive, and they're trying to stay one step ahead of the water that's rushing in, as well as trying to stay away from Cal. Like, that's where the film shines for me personally. Is this mad rush and this mad dash to get to the top of the boat and then try to survive. And then the stuff that happens after that, where you see the brutal reality, the raw, unflinching reality of what happened when Rose is holding on for dear life on that piece of wood, and there's this guy who comes in and he's trying to look for survivors, and the ocean is just littered with dead, frozen bodies, just one after another, of men, women, children. It just really showcases the cold, brutal, harsh reality of what happened that night. And it brings in a cold, brisk bout, not necessarily bout, but breath of just reality. And it helps make things feel like there's more stakes, and it makes it more resonant. And that's why it's a film that I like. But then again, it's also another reason why I don't love it, because there's not enough of that. So much of it is the schmaltzy, sentimental, sugary romance stuff. And that doesn't do anything for me. Like, I'm more into the thriller aspect. I'm more into the drama that's tied into what actually happened aspect of a film about Titanic. And even the stuff with the older Rose, like, that was written in the same vein as the stuff with younger Rose and Jack, and that just came across as very unrealistic in a lot of ways. Like, it didn't come across as something that felt like it tapped into reality. It felt like it was something that was straight out of a fantasy. A 100 over 100-year-old woman who has no memory problems whatsoever and can just list off and just tell this story for like 2 hours without having any issues. That's not very realistic, but I get it. That's what they're trying to go for. It's got this very fantasy, idealized, stylized take on Titanic and story between Jack and Rose and so on. But part of me just would have honestly liked the film more if we didn't even have any of that. And I know there's a lot of people who feel like, well, that's what makes Titanic great. I'm like, no, what makes Titanic a good film for me is the spectacle. It's the visual effects. It's when the Titanic sinks. It's not any of the romance stuff. Like, you could replace that with more character development for people who are more integral and are actual real people who survived the Titanic or died that on the Titanic. And I think you would have every bit as of a compelling film, if not a more compelling movie. But it wouldn't be necessarily as much of a blockbuster. And I think that's kind of what the sacrifice was at the end of the day. Is I really do feel that James Cameron and 20th Century Fox and Paramount Pictures, they wanted a blockbuster. That's what Titanic was built to be. Much like the real Titanic, it was built to be a moneymaker. And I think that's what happened here, is they put in the whole romance angle with Jack and Rose and made that the focus of things because that's what would enable the movie to become a blockbuster. And it worked. It made a shit ton of money and it broke all kinds of records. But to me, it's kind of fleeting when it comes to like the long-lasting legacy of Titanic, because you ask a lot of people nowadays. Let's just say people who are like 20 years old or younger, or maybe like in their like 30s. There is starting to be more of a pushback against this film, where people are like, "Oh, this is kind of overhyped and overrated, and like this isn't a masterpiece. Like the writing is not that great in a lot of ways, and the romance, which is considered to be one of the best ever in any movie, is kind of not really that good. It's kind of just a lot of cliches, and they're not really written that well, and they're not really implemented in a way where it's putting really that much of a unique twist on them. It's just rich girl meets poor boy and they fall in love, and that's it. It won all these Academy Awards when it came out. It had all this acclaim. And then you see the movie and you're like, yeah, I mean the scenes where the Titanic sinks and some of the other sequences here and there are pretty awesome and awe-inspiring, but the writing leaves a lot to be desired. And this is where I think Cameron should have put his ego aside for once and brought somebody else on board. Brought somebody else on board on the ship who was more experienced with writing romance or historical dramas. Bring somebody on board who has more experience with that, who knows what they're doing. Then you can come in and, punch some things up, throw in a few things in here and there, provide your input. But handling it all himself, it was too tall of an order, too tall of a task for him. And unlike other people, I don't think he pulled it off. I really don't. I don't think he did. And he tried to provide a focus or provide some focus on other characters other than Jack and Rose, like the captain and the guy, the architect of the Titanic, and Molly Brown, and so on. But because Jack and Rose were just so much of the focus of the overall script and the story, all these other characters just didn't have that much screen time. So they never really felt fleshed out. So the only characters that ever felt fleshed out to me was Jack and Rose. There were other characters they tried to throw in there, like Fabricio or whatever his name was, who was like the friend of Jack, who was there with him at the card game, and he joined Jack on the Titanic. And the way that character is written, just there's nothing to that character. So when that character dies, who gives a shit? I'm supposed to care because he was friends with Leonardo DiCaprio's character. He was friends with Jack, so I'm supposed to care. Or that other Irish guy, the Irish guy who gets shot in the chest at one point in the film. I'm supposed to care about this guy again because he's just friends with Jack. Just very weak writing when it comes to these characters. You have a lot of these characters, but they don't really have as much depth, so they're very shallow. And I just feel you could have added more depth to a lot of these other characters, or just cut out some of these characters. Who cares about the Irish guy? Who gives a crap about Fabrizio? Just cut those characters out of the film. There are other characters in the movie you could give more screen time to. Molly Brown, the architect, so on. Instead of these other characters, it just felt so extraneous. And there's just all this other stuff that it does. It just makes the entire story and the plot and the film overall waterlogged. It gets waterlogged, and it gets it gets too top heavy at times. And then I wouldn't say it sinks completely like the actual Titanic, but you know, it's getting there. Like it's still afloat, but but part of it's still underwater. The cast though, pretty good, pretty great. Uh, I will say this though: Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio, who get a lot of praise, and understandably so in a lot of ways, because the two have really electric, dynamic chemistry with one another. They really do make a great on-screen couple. And they do a lot of heavy lifting, and they try the best they can to make some of these really bad lines and these really just schmaltzy cornball moments work. And because of just how endearing they are and how talented they are, they almost do it. There are also a few moments where their inexperience as actors, at least when it comes to like this kind of a big film, do kind of show in some of the line delivery. But for the most part, though, I do feel the two of them did a good job. But yeah, Kate Winslet, she's beautiful, she's elegant, she's also able to, let loose a little bit. Um, and she definitely does have a lot of charisma that's all her own. And DiCaprio has that as well. Definitely has that leading man uh, uh, appeal, and I don't think his range as an actor was necessarily as wide as it would be later on in his career, but it was still good enough. You know, he had enough charisma and spark that he was able to kind of work around some of his limitations. Billy Zane, um, he plays a great asshole, great snobbish, just arrogant prick. The kind of guy you love to hate, so much so to the point where you just wanted to see more scenes with this guy. I wanted to see more of Cal, like see what makes this guy tick. You know, because Zane just did such a great job playing that character. Frances Fisher, she's pretty good too as Rose's mother, but other than her like giving her daughter the stink eye throughout the majority of the film, there's not really a lot for her to do. There's like that one scene where she's talking to her and saying that, you know, we're women and we don't have a lot of choices, a lot of opportunities. And what, do you want all of your precious things sold? Like, you have to marry Cal. Like, this is what you have to do. And to survive, and to make the family line continue on, and our legacy to survive, you know, that kind of thing. But other than that scene, like there's not much to that role, so there's not a lot for her to work with. Gloria Stuart, who played modern day at the time Rose, I felt the performance was just kind of meh to me personally. She was under a lot of heavy makeup to make her look older. But just a lot of that performance was just so sappy and melodramatic. Like every line that she delivered was just so melodramatic and sappy to me. Bill Paxton. I like Bill Paxton. It's nice to see him again. has kind of pretty much a nothing role. He's just this guy who's a treasure hunter. He's trying to find the heart of the ocean, and sits there and is listening to Rose tell her story, and then doesn't ever actually find the heart of the ocean. Not a bad performance of Bill Paxton, but he's got nothing to work with. Kind of the same thing with Suzy Amos, who plays Rose's granddaughter. Not really that much of a role. Danny Nucci is Fabrizio. Like, he's got a lot of screen time, and he's got this big moment where he gets crushed by a part of the ship, but it has no emotional weight to it because the character is not very well written. David Warner as Lovejoy, Cal's valet and bodyguard. Uh, the way Cal was written was very cartoonish. This was even more so. I mean, what a cartoonish, over the top villain. Warner did a good job playing the role, but I mean, let's be honest here. It is an incredibly just over the top, just total cartoon character. Jason Barry, who plays Tommy Ryan, the Irish third class passenger, the guy who gets shot by Officer Murdoch. Not a bad performance, but a nothing character. They try to make a big deal out of this character, but he's paper thin. He's just a guy who is in third class, and he's Irish, and he happens to be friends with Jack and Fabrizio, and that's it. That's all there is to that character. Uh, Kathy Bates is Molly Brown. It's nice to see Kathy Bates. She's a good actress. She played the role really well. Apparently, Reba McEntire was offered the role, but she turned it down because it conflicted with her touring schedule. I'm glad, because I really don't feel that Reba would have been able to pull it off as well as Kathy Bates did. Victor Garber is Thomas Andrews, the ship's builder, the ship's architect. I think it's one of the best performances in the film. And it's good enough that I wanted to see more of this character. I really wanted to see more of Victor Garber, and you didn't really get a whole lot of that. I mean, one of the best scenes in the film, acting wise, to me, is when he's standing there in this living room of sorts. It's like in this room that's like massive, and it's got this fireplace, and there's this clock on the mantle, and he takes time, which is his last time alive on the ship, because the water is coming in. And he takes the time to fix the clock because it's the only thing that he can fix that is left on the ship. And I thought that was very heartbreaking and sad and tragic. And the performance is great. And he showcased the emotion and just the sadness and just the weight of everything without any lines of dialogue. So want to give him a lot of props and kudos. I also want to give Bernard Hill a lot of credit for playing the captain. You know, that's another role that I feel really does stand out in a good way. You know, he was stern, but he also had some moments where he kind of, was able to yuck it up a little bit. But he also was very tempted. And in a lot of ways, what happened with the iceberg could have been avoided if, they didn't go as fast. But, he was trying to make a name for himself. This was his last voyage. He had this other guy who was connected to the press in his ear and was telling him about, a way for him to make headlines during his last voyage and post as captain. And he let it get to his head a little bit, and it ultimately cost him and so many other people. Jonathan Hyde, he was the managing director. Jonathan Hyde, he's just good as playing. He's good at playing these kind of ignorant, boorish characters, and this role is no exception. But it's also a role where he doesn't really in it a whole lot. But he does what he can with the role. Eric Braeden as Jacob Astor, royalty, rich guy, snooty, stuck up, but not really much to the role other than that. or Bernard Fox as the Colonel Archibald Gracie the Fourth, or Michael Ensign as Benjamin Guggenheim, or Mark Lindsay Chapman as Henry Wilde, or Evan Stewart as Murdoch. Like, these are guys who are chief officers, and they're involved with the scenes where they're trying to keep order when everyone's trying to get on the lifeboats. And maybe saying that the roles there's not much there is selling them short. And now that I think about it, and it is, because I want to give those two their kudos and their due as well, because those roles weren't particularly super meaty, but they were very difficult, and there was a lot of stuff that they had to do and pull off, and I felt that both of them did it rather convincingly. And in fact, the whole scene where he pulls out, one of the officers pulls out a gun and is like, "I'm gonna shoot you all like dogs," like that was improvised by the actor. So that the credit for that scene goes to him. Um, One other person I want to mention is an actor that you might, yeah, Ian Griffith. Ian Griffith, he played Fifth Officer Harold Lowe, who was the only officer to lead a lifeboat to retrieve survivors uh, of the sinking, from the icy waters. And he's the one that rescues Rose. I wanted to mention him because I thought he did a incredible job with a small role. But yeah, honestly, for the most part, a great cast. Um, Capable, strong performers. Not necessarily a ton of really big names that would become bigger, like DiCaprio and Kate Winslet after this film. But prior to this movie, neither one was like mega. They weren't mega stars, which I think that does add something to the cast. It detracts from the performances at times because they're kind of inexperienced, and that leads to some lines and some scenes that are stronger than others between the two. But it also adds a certain liveliness to it that I don't think you would have otherwise. Now, when it comes to the technical aspects of the film, I mean, it won Oscars for these aspects of the production, and it deserved every single one of them. The cinematography by Russell Carpenter is just so choice. It's a superb, sublime-looking film. Just gorgeous looking shots of the Titanic coming ashore and on the ocean, and then the scene, even the scenes of the ship sinking have a certain tragic beauty to them, the way that they're shot. The scenes where they're at night, they're looking up at the stars, like just even the sequences that are inside the Titanic, showcasing the lavish interiors of it. Just a really great looking film, and the cinematography is a big reason for that. The film also features some excellent editing by Conrad Buff, James Cameron, Richard A. Harris. Like, the editing in the film is very tight, but it's also very special, very unique in some ways, in terms of the way that it just transitions from one scene to the next. Like, there's some just absolutely beautiful transition shots in this film, where you transition from old Rose to young Rose, or young Rose to old Rose, or the wreck of the Titanic to the Titanic when it was still sailing and it was still in one piece. The music by James Horner, I mean, his music is so integral to any success that this film has, and the score is spectacular. It's in a lot of ways it is the beating heart of this movie. And speaking of music, I actually don't mind the Celine Dion song. It got really annoying because it was just everywhere. It literally was everywhere. You would go to Burger King, you would hear it at Burger King. You go to the mall, you would hear it in the mall. You would go into your car and you turn on the radio and you would hear My Heart Will Go On. But now, since I don't hear it all the time, don't mind the song. It's a pretty good song, and Celine Dion rocks the vocals. It's a big budget film. I mean, $200 million, and at the time, I think it was one of the biggest budgets ever. But it's definitely on the screen, and it's a movie that, in every sense of the word, is a blockbuster. And just like with a lot of other blockbuster films of its time and even now, like there are moments where it will wow you, it will blow you away, but then there's other moments where it won't necessarily be as strong, and it won't really resonate in the same capacity. So it's a film that I do feel is a little overrated. I know that's kind of a buzzword, but I do feel that does apply to this film. But at the same time, I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. Uh, but it's also a movie that it's not one of my favorites. It's not a film that I'm going to watch over and over again or watch again anytime soon. And I know that this is like a 45-minute review. It's Titanic. This film is 3 hours long. Like, there's so many cast members, there's so many other aspects of the film and the production, all this other stuff. It's a big film. It's a big epic film. So it's only fitting that the review is Titanic in length. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of Titanic, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.